The bullet hit her before anyone in the room even heard the gun. 1 second, Zuri Coleman was standing exactly where she always stood, 3 steps behind Kang Min-jae, holding his schedule, watching his back the way she had every single day for 6 years. The next second, she was falling. Not stumbling, not losing her footing, falling. The way people fall when something is torn through them and the body simply stops arguing with gravity. Min-jae caught her by instinct before his brain understood what was happening. Her weight hit his arms and he looked down and saw the dark stain spreading through the fabric of her navy blazer. And for one terrible, suspended moment, the most feared Korean Mafia boss in New York City could not move. The screaming started. The room erupted. His security team was already moving, shouting coordinates into earpieces, overturning tables, hunting the shooter who had already vanished into the chaos of 400 panicked guests inside the Manhattan Museum of Art. Min-jae heard none of it. He was looking at Zuri's face. Her eyes were open. That was the thing that undid him. Her eyes were open, and she was looking at him with an expression he had never once seen from her in 6 years of working side by side. Not pain, not fear, relief. Like she had been waiting to do this for a long time and was simply glad it was finally done. "Don't," he said. The word came out wrong. Too hard, too sharp. The way he spoke to men who owed him money. He tried again. "Stay with me, Zuri. Stay with me right now." Her lips moved. He bent closer to hear her. "You have a 9 o'clock," she whispered. "Don't cancel it." Then her eyes closed. If you've ever watched someone collapse and realized, too late, how much they meant to you, then you already know what this story costs. This is not a love story about a powerful man and a beautiful woman. This is a story about what happens when someone spends 6 years protecting a person who never once looked back to check if they were still standing. And what that person does when they finally understand what they had. If this story makes you feel something, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city or country where you're watching from. I read every single one, and it means more than you know to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what happens in that hospital room, what Min-jae finds in Zuri's office after she goes into surgery, is going to change everything you think you know about what it means to be loyal to someone. Now, back to the night it all broke open. The charity gala had been Zuri's suggestion, or rather, she had put it on his calendar 14 months ago with a note clipped to the front in her small, precise handwriting. This appearance would benefit the Kang Foundation's public posture. Attendance strongly recommended. She had written strongly recommended the way some people write mandatory, but she never used that word with him. She had learned somewhere in the first year that the word mandatory made him push back on principle. Min-jae had not wanted to attend. He had told her so 3 times in the 48 hours leading up to it, and she had responded each time with a variation of the same answer. "I understand. Your car is scheduled for 7:15. Until he stopped arguing and put on the suit she had already sent to the penthouse, dry cleaned and pressed. The museum had been rented for the evening by one of the city's oldest charitable organizations, the kind with marble floors and donor plaques on every wall and waitstaff trained to look straight through you unless you were holding a full glass. 400 guests, senators, hedge fund managers, a former mayor, and the particular category of Manhattan socialite who used charity as a synonym for networking. Min-jae moved through the room the way he always moved through rooms, with the particular stillness of a man who doesn't need to take up space to own it. He shook hands with the people whose hands were worth shaking. He said nothing that could be quoted. He accepted a glass of champagne and did not drink it. Zuri followed at her standard 3-step distance, her tablet angled slightly away from view, her earpiece in, her eyes moving constantly across the room in the pattern Min-jae had never consciously noticed. Entrance points, exits, staff positions, sight lines. He had a head of security for all of that, a full team. 12 men positioned throughout the venue, 2 outside the building, 1 in the vehicle. He just didn't know that Zuri's version of that was more comprehensive than any of theirs. Mamuchat. She had spotted the problem 40 minutes before it happened. A waiter. Late 20s, hired through the catering agency the museum used, but the badge number didn't match the staff manifest she had cross-referenced that morning. She had cross-referenced it that morning because she cross-referenced every staff manifest at every venue where Min Jae appeared. She had been doing this for 4 years without telling anyone, including Min Jae, because it was simply something that needed doing, and she was the only person who had thought to do it. She had flagged it quietly to the head of security, a man named Park Sung-ho, through a text message at 9:14 p.m. Park had texted back, "We have eyes on all staff. Stand by." At 9:22, the waiter had moved to the west corridor. At 9:26, Zuri's eyes found the antique mirror hung decoratively on the corridor wall. An ornate piece, 18th century, positioned at an angle that made it essentially useless as a mirror and essentially perfect as a way to see behind you without turning around. She saw the reflection. She did not think. She did not calculate odds or weigh her own safety or ask herself whether she was sure. She had spent 6 years building the kind of certainty that doesn't require hesitation, and it kicked in the way it always had, quietly, without announcement, without drama. She moved. 3 steps became 1 step. Her body was between Min Jae and the corridor mouth before the gun cleared the waiter's jacket. The shot hit her in the left shoulder, punched through the muscle, and she was already falling when Min Jae turned and found her collapsing into him, and the room became chaos. He held her on the floor of the museum corridor with his jacket pressed against the wound, and her blood on his hands, and his suit, and the marble tile, and he kept talking. He didn't know what he was saying, just kept talking because it seemed like the most important thing was to keep her from retreating somewhere he couldn't follow. His security team had the shooter down in under 2 minutes. The museum was in lockdown. Ambulances were en route. Min Jae registered none of this except as background noise. He was looking at the small laminated card that had slipped from Zuri's jacket pocket when she fell. It lay on the marble beside her, and it was the size of a business card, and on it, in her small handwriting, was printed a single line. Emergency contacts. No family listed. Contact Dr. Hana Lim, colleague, 212-555-0174. No family. He had not known that. He had not known whether she had a family. He had not known her emergency contact. He had not known, standing here with her blood on his hands and her eyes closed, and the ambulance still 3 minutes away, almost anything about the woman who had spent 6 years standing 3 steps behind him. The shame of it hit him like something physical. He rode in the ambulance with her. Park tried to redirect him to the secure vehicle. Min Jae walked past him without a word and climbed in beside the gurney, and something in his face made the paramedics decide not to argue. He sat in the plastic seat with his hands on his knees and watched them work on her and tried to remember her birthday. He couldn't. He tried to remember if she had ever mentioned where she grew up, what she did on weekends, whether she had friends, whether she was happy, whether the job, his life, his constant demanding chaos of a life, was something she had chosen because she wanted it, or because she'd needed the income, or because of some other reason he had never once thought to ask about. He came up with nothing. Not because the information didn't exist. She had worked for him for 6 years and she was a human being with a full life outside of his orbit, which meant the information absolutely existed, but because he had never once asked. He had treated her the way he treated his phone. Necessary. Reliable. Invisible until it stopped working. The thought made him sick with himself. She came out of surgery 4 hours and 11 minutes later. The bullet had fractured her shoulder blade and torn through muscle, but missed the subclavian artery by centimeters. The surgeon used the word fortunate twice. Min Jae stood in the hallway and listened to the word fortunate and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a name for. She was moved to a private room at 2:47 a.m. Min Jae had the hospital's best suite arranged within the hour. Not the standard upgrade, but the actual best suite, the one with the real furniture and the south-facing window, the one they kept for visiting foreign dignitaries and the kind of wealthy patients who never had to ask what things cost. He did not tell anyone he was doing this for his secretary. He did not particularly want to examine why. He sat in the chair beside her bed and looked at her face, which was slack and pale against the white pillow, and the monitors beeped their steady, indifferent rhythm. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, he realized he was still holding the laminated card he'd picked up off the museum floor. No family listed. He set it on the nightstand beside the water pitcher. He stayed until dawn turned the window gray. Then he went to her office. He told himself he was looking for information, contact lists, next of kin, something useful. This was not entirely a lie. It was also not the whole truth. Zuri's office was on the 14th floor of the Kong Industries building, a corner room that she had somehow made feel entirely unlike every other corner room in the building. Where the executive floors tended toward the specific brand of aggressive minimalism that said, "I am important and I don't waste time on comfort," her office had a small potted plant on the windowsill, a well-worn paperback spine-up on the edge of the desk, and a photograph pinned, not framed, pinned, to the corkboard beside the monitor. He looked at the photograph. Two women standing in front of what appeared to be the Prospect Park band shell. One was Zuri, maybe 5 or 6 years younger, laughing at something outside the frame with her whole face. The other woman he didn't recognize. He had never seen Zuri laugh like that in 6 years. He stood there for a long moment looking at the photograph of the laughing woman he had employed for 6 years and barely known, and then he sat down in her chair and began to look through her files. He was not prepared for what he found. The surface organization was what he expected from her, meticulous, cross-indexed, color-coded with a logic that revealed itself the longer you sat with it. Every file had a date, a subject header, a priority rating, and a brief note in her handwriting explaining the context and her recommended action. He pulled the first file that wasn't labeled with standard company business. Contingency. Kangmin J. Security Protocol Variants. Updated. Quarterly. He opened it. It was 43 pages long. 43 pages of security protocols she had developed herself, outside of the official security team, cross-referenced with the official team's protocols, and updated every 3 months to account for changes in Min Jae's schedule, known threats, neighborhood surveillance patterns, and what she had labeled behavioral predictability windows, the times of day and week when Min Jae's movements were most consistent and therefore most vulnerable. She had been tracking his vulnerabilities, not to exploit them, to close them, quietly, invisibly, without ever being asked. He turned to the section labeled Threat Assessments, active, and found 47 names he recognized and 3 he didn't. Against each name was a summary of the threat level, the basis for the assessment, and a recommended response. Against 2 names were notes that said, escalated to Park SH. No action taken. He called Park. The Donovan situation in March, he said when Park picked up on the second ring. Zuri flagged it to you? A pause. Sir, she flagged several, Donovan specifically. Yes. She sent a file. I reviewed it and assessed the risk as manageable. Manageable. Min Jae read the entry again. Zuri had assessed the Donovan situation as high risk, immediate attention recommended, and had included 17 supporting data points. When the Donovan situation resolved, how did it resolve? Another pause. We reached an arrangement. Which cost us how much? Sir, how much, Sung Ho? The number Park named was significant. Min Jae looked at Zuri's note, which said in plain language that earlier intervention would have prevented the need for a financial arrangement entirely. He closed the folder. He opened another. Operations. Unofficial. Route variance log. She had been tracking his convoy routes independently for 4 years and flagging variance recommendations to his driver, not through official channels, not with his knowledge or authorization, but directly, quietly, through brief notes left in the driver's pickup manifest. He pulled the variance logs. On March 14th, the rerouted path had avoided the block where a federal task force had been conducting a raid that evening. The original route would have placed the convoy directly in the path of the operation. On July 7th, the rerouted path had avoided the underpass where, according to a police report filed the following day, a vehicle had been positioned by persons unknown with what investigators believed was an intent to intercept a target. On November 3rd, the rerouted path had been longer by 8 minutes and had avoided a road that collapsed under a utility failure 2 hours later. 3 incidents. 3 avoidances. And those were just the ones in the log. The log went back 4 years. He sat very still in her chair and read the whole thing. It took him 2 hours. By the time he found the folder labeled Personal, Boss, which was filed at the very back of the bottom drawer under a copy of the office lease agreement, his hands were not entirely steady. Inside were 2 items. The first was a receipt from the florist on 58th Street, dated the second week of September, for each of the past 5 years, for a single arrangement of white lilies. The second was a small notebook, handwritten, in her small, precise script. He opened it. The first entry was dated January of the year she'd started. It said, "He doesn't eat before difficult meetings. He thinks it makes him sharper. It makes him irritable and more likely to escalate. Find a way to ensure breakfast is available before the Chen negotiation on Thursday." The next entry said, "He canceled the afternoon with the Holloway people. He doesn't realize they're connected to the Reyes situation. Need to manage the reschedule carefully." The entries continued, page after page, year after year. Not a diary, not complaints, not the venting of a frustrated employee. They were operational notes, observations, strategies for keeping him safe, effective, and functional. Written in the same tone she used for everything, precise and unromantic. But underneath the precision was something that took him a full 10 minutes of rereading to correctly identify. It was care. Not the word she would have used. She probably would have called it professional responsibility or operational necessity or something else measured and deflecting. But he had been in enough rooms with enough people to know the difference between someone doing a job and someone who had quietly, stubbornly, over years of small invisible decisions, decided that another person's life was worth protecting. He had just never expected to find it pointed at him. He was still sitting in her chair, the notebook in his hands, when Park knocked and entered at 8:15. Park took one look at Min Jae's face, and whatever he'd been planning to say became something else. "Sir?" "Sit down." Park sat. "Tell me everything she flagged that your team didn't act on." Park was quiet for a moment. Then, "This could take some time." "Good," Min Jae said. "We have time." He set the notebook on the desk between them and pressed his palm flat against the cover, the way you do with something you're not ready to let go of yet. Outside the window, New York moved through its morning without him, indifferent and relentless, the way it always had. For the first time in 6 years, Kang Min Jae didn't care about any of it. He wanted to know who Zuri Coleman was. He was starting to understand that he had been the last person in her life to find out. Park Sung-ho had been with Min Jae for 11 years. He had watched the man walk into rooms where people wanted him dead and walk back out again without changing his expression. He had seen Min Jae negotiate across a table from men who had killed other men for sport and come away with everything he wanted. He had, on 2 separate occasions, physically shielded Min Jae from violence and counted it as the most important work of his life. He had never once been afraid of Kang Min Jae. He was a little afraid of him right now. Min Jae hadn't raised his voice. That was the thing. He was sitting behind Zuri's desk in Zuri's chair with Zuri's notebook in front of him and his hands completely still, and his voice when he spoke was the same temperature as the marble floors downstairs, the kind of cold that isn't dramatic. The kind that's just cold, the way certain rooms are just cold, and you realize it's been cold for a long time and you simply hadn't noticed. "The Donovan situation," Min Jae said. "Walk me through your reasoning." Park kept his posture straight. He had learned a long time ago that slouching in front of Min Jae read as guilt whether or not guilt was warranted. "She sent a risk assessment. I reviewed it. My team reviewed it. We assessed the situation differently than she did." "She assessed it as high risk, immediate attention." "Yes." "And you assessed it as manageable." "At the time, the intelligence we had, her intelligence was better than yours." Min Jae said it without inflection, not an accusation, a statement of fact being entered into the record. "The outcome confirms that. The financial resolution we reached, that number, confirms that. Her early intervention recommendation, had it been followed, would have prevented the need for that resolution entirely." Park said nothing. "That's not a question, Sung-ho. I'm not asking you to defend yourself. I'm establishing what happened." "Understood. How many times did she flag something to your team that your team did not act on?" The question sat in the air between them. Park had known, the moment Min Jae called him at 4 in the morning about the Donovan file, that this conversation was coming. He had spent the drive over running numbers in his head. Formally, Park said carefully, 11 times over 4 years. Min Jae's eyes moved to him slowly. Formally. There were informal communications, notes to the drivers, adjustments she made through administrative channels that technically fell within her authority to make. How many of those? Park exhaled. We'd need to pull the full record to give you an exact count, but based on what I've seen, the root variances alone, across 4 years, I'd estimate in the range of 30 to 40 separate interventions. The room was very quiet. 30 to 40, Min Jae repeated. Approximately. And how many of those resulted in outcomes that later proved she was correct? Park thought about lying. Not out of self-preservation, he was past that, but because the accurate answer was going to land in a specific way, and he wasn't sure the room was built to hold it. Most of them, he said. From what I can piece together, most of them. Min Jae picked up the small notebook and set it down again. The gesture was controlled, but Park had known this man for 11 years, and he saw the thing underneath the control. The same thing he'd seen when Min Jae came out of the ambulance at the hospital with blood on his suit and the particular look of someone who had just been shown a map of territory they thought they knew. I want a full audit, Min Jae said. Every communication she sent to this organization over 4 years, every flag, every recommendation, every variance request, every note to the drivers. I want it cross-referenced against outcomes. I want to know exactly what we had and what we did with it. That's a significant undertaking, said. Then you should start immediately. Park stood. He was almost to the door when Min Jae spoke again. Sung Ho. He stopped. The gala. Last night. Her flag about the staff manifest discrepancy. Walk me through the timeline. Park turned back slowly. She texted me at 9:14. The badge number irregularity on a catering staff member. And your response? I confirmed receipt and told her we had eyes on all staff. Did you pull the badge irregularity? A pause that lasted slightly too long. We initiated a check, but the shooter was already moving by the time your team identified him. The situation developed quickly. She identified him 40 minutes before he moved. Min Jae's voice still hadn't changed temperature. Your team identified him after the gun was already in his hand. That is the distinction I'm making. Park's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. She put herself in front of me because your team's response to her warning was insufficient. Another statement. Still no raised voice. I want that in the audit as well. Understood. Close the door on your way out, but... Park closed the door. In the hallway outside, he stood for a moment with his hand still on the handle, and the thing in his chest that he didn't particularly want to identify was shame. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The kind that settles into your sternum and doesn't move. He had dismissed her. Not maliciously. He would have said, if pressed, that he respected her competence. He had dismissed her the way you dismiss something that is quiet and consistent and always there. The same way you stop hearing a clock after a while, not because it stopped ticking, but because your brain has filed it under background. She had been ticking for 4 years. He walked toward the elevator and pulled out his phone and began making calls. And the first thing he said to each person he called was, pull everything Zuri Coleman ever sent us. Every communication, every note, every record. And after a moment, to the first person, no, I don't know exactly what we're looking for. Start with what she flagged that we didn't act on. A pause on the line. Just pull it, Park said. All of it. Downstairs in the operations room on the 3rd floor, the morning briefing was already 40 minutes behind schedule. The 7 men around the table had each independently reached the conclusion that today was not a day to be the person who brought problems. They had reached this conclusion because their boss had come in at 8 a.m., gone directly upstairs, had not come back down, and the rumor moving through the building, through the secure floors, past the front desk, into the kitchen where the morning coffee was getting cold, was that he had been in his secretary's office all night. Not his office. Her office. The senior lieutenant, a man named Cho Byom-seok, who had been with the organization for 9 years, and had the particular self-possession of someone who had survived several management transitions by being good at his job and invisible in his personal opinions, was running the briefing in Min Jae's absence. He was halfway through the security debrief on the previous night's incident when the door opened and Min Jae walked in. The room adjusted. It did this automatically, the way a plant adjusts to the direction of light, without deciding to, without knowing it's doing it. Chairs straightened, voices dropped. The briefing materials that had been slightly scattered across the table were quietly gathered and organized. Min Jae sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces around him and said, "Continue." Cho continued. He walked through the shooter's profile. A freelance operative, no direct affiliation to any known rival organization yet identified, hired through a third-party broker whose identity was currently being pursued. The museum's security footage was being analyzed. The police had a parallel investigation that the organization's legal team was monitoring. "Who's the broker?" Min Jae asked. "We have a name, Yu Tae-yang. He operates out of Flushing. He's been a mid-level arranger for—" "I know who he is." Min Jae's eyes moved around the table. "Why was he not already a person of interest before last night?" The table was quiet. "The threat intelligence we had going into the gala," Min Jae said. "Where did it come from?" Cho glanced at the materials in front of him. The security team's standard pre-event assessment, cross-referenced against, "Did that assessment include Yu Tae-yang?" A pause. "Not directly, no." "Did Zuri Coleman's security protocols include Yu Tae-yang?" Min Jae asked. He already knew the answer. He had read the file twice. He watched Cho's face as the man absorbed the implication of the question. "I'm not familiar with Miss Coleman's. She flagged Yu Tae-yang as a potential threat vector in a security memo she filed 8 months ago." Min Jae said it the way he said everything this morning. Flat, even, like he was reading a weather report. The memo was sent to the security team. It was not acted upon. The man she flagged as a potential threat vector is now connected to the operative who shot her. The table was very quiet. "I want to know," Min Jae said, "how an executive secretary with no formal security training and no official intelligence access produced a threat assessment that identified a relevant actor 8 months before my security team did." Nobody had an answer to that. Several people looked at their hands. One person looked at the door, which was a mistake, because Min Jae noticed, and his attention moved to that person and stayed there for 3 seconds before moving on. And those 3 seconds were deeply uncomfortable for everyone present. "I'm going to ask that question again in 5 days, Min Jae said. "I'd like an answer by then." He pushed back from the table. "Move the Yu Tae-yang situation to priority. I want him located today." He stood and left. The room released a collective breath. Cho Byum-seok looked at the materials in front of him, then at the door Min Jae had walked out of, and made a private decision that he was going to pull every memo Zuri Coleman had ever written and read them personally before he did anything else today. At noon, Min Jae went back to the hospital. He brought white lilies. He had told the assistant who'd called to confirm his afternoon schedule that he needed lilies, white ones, fresh, not from a grocery, and she had not asked why, which he appreciated. He sat in the chair beside Zuri's bed and looked at her face and did something he was not accustomed to doing, which was nothing. He just sat there. The monitors beeped. A nurse came in, checked vitals, left. Outside the south-facing window, the city moved. Zuri's face in unconsciousness had a quality her face almost never had in waking life, which was stillness. She was always in slight motion when she was awake, taking notes, scanning a room, adjusting the angle of something that needed adjusting. Her face reflected this, a particular watchful alertness that he had always categorized as professional attentiveness and now recognized as something more continuous and more personal than that. Unconscious, she looked younger. He hated that she looked younger. It meant the years of watchfulness had left their mark on her face, and he had never once noticed because it was simply how her face was. His phone rang. He silenced it. It rang again. He looked at the screen. Cho Byum-seok. He stepped out into the hall. "What?" "Yu Tae-yang," Cho said. "We have a location, Flushing. He's been sitting on it since last night. Hasn't moved, which is unusual. He's waiting to confirm the job." That's our read, yes. He doesn't know it failed? Apparently not. The shooter never reported out. He was in custody before he could communicate with anyone. Min-jae leaned against the hospital corridor wall. The paint was that specific shade of institutional beige that existed in no other context. A man in a visitor badge walked past without looking at him. Who's the client? Who hired you to arrange the hit? That's what I'm calling about. A pause. The broker chain goes through a shell we've seen before. It connects to an operating name we flagged last year as a rival interest, specifically in relation to the Harlem expansion negotiations. Min-jae was quiet. Sir, Cho said carefully, the name at the end of the chain is Reyes. The Reyes situation, the same name Zuri had written about in the notebook's first year. The connection she had tried to surface through the Holloway rescheduling. The thread she had pulled 4 years ago that his people had not followed. Send me the chain documentation, Min-jae said. His voice was still even. And tell me the moment Yu Tae-young moves. He hung up and stood in the hospital corridor for a moment. He thought about the notebook, the entry from the first year. He doesn't realize they're connected to the Reyes situation, need to manage the reschedule carefully. She had known. 4 years ago, from a scheduling irregularity, she had identified the connection. She had managed it quietly, at the administrative level, the only level available to her. And the connection had stayed dormant. The Reyes network had stayed at arm's length, until someone in his organization stopped paying attention to the quiet management that had been keeping it there. He went back into the room. He sat down. He picked up the white lilies and set them in the water pitcher because there was no vase and you work with what you have. He looked at her face for a long time. You knew about Reyes, he said quietly, to the room, to the monitors, to her. You've known for 4 years. The monitors beeped. I need you to wake up, he said. I need you to tell me what else you knew that I didn't. At 3 p.m., a woman arrived at the hospital front desk and asked for Zuri Coleman's room. The desk directed her to the private suite on the 7th floor. She took the elevator up and walked down the hall and opened the door and stopped when she found Kang Min-jae sitting beside the bed. She was the woman from the photograph on the corkboard, the one from Prospect Park. Shorter than Zuri, mid-40s, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of face that was composed but not performing composure. She was holding a tote bag with what looked like paperbacks inside. She looked at Min-jae, then at Zuri, then back at Min-jae. Who are you? She said. Kang Min-jae. He stood. I'm her employer. The woman's face did something complicated. I know who you are, she said, in a tone that clarified exactly what she meant by that, which was not complimentary. I meant, what are you doing in her room? Visiting. She's unconscious. Yes. The woman set her tote bag down on the chair beside the door. She crossed her arms. She was looking at him the way people looked at things they were deciding whether to trust, and her assessment was clearly not trending positive. Her name is Dr. Hana Lim, Min-jae said. You're her emergency contact. The woman's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? It was on a card in her pocket. He paused. You're the only emergency contact she has listed. Something moved across Hana Lim's face at that. A quick shadow of something that was either grief or anger or the place where both of those things live when they're living together. She looked at Zuri. Her jaw tightened. You should know, Hana said, still not looking at him, that she was going to quit. The words landed in the room and stayed there. What? Min-jae said. 3 weeks ago. Hana finally turned to look at him directly, and there was no performance in her eyes, just the flat honesty of someone who has decided they have nothing to lose in this conversation. She told me she was done. She had been thinking about it for 6 months. She had a letter written. Min-jae said nothing. She loved that job, Hana said. That's the thing you need to understand. She didn't leave jobs she loved. She stayed through things most people would have walked out of years before. But she told me she was done. A pause. She said she was tired of being invisible. The word moved through the room like a draft from an open window. Invisible. She was going to give her notice the week after the gala, Hana continued. Her voice was steady, but it was taking work to keep it that way. She was going to do one last event, hand things over cleanly, and walk away. Another pause. That's what she was planning when she stepped in front of that bullet. Min-jae sat back down. He did it slowly, the way a person sits when their legs have decided the decision without asking. She was leaving, he said. Yes. He looked at Zuri's face, the stillness, the monitors. She spent 6 years protecting me, he said. It wasn't directed at Hana exactly. It was more like he was saying it to test whether the sentence was real. She was leaving, and she still... That's who she is, Hana said. Her voice had gone quieter. That's always been who she is. She doesn't stop being who she is just because she's made a decision. Min-jae pressed his hands flat against his knees. He could feel the fabric of his trousers against his palms. He focused on that for a moment because the alternative was to sit in the full weight of what had just been handed to him, and he wasn't ready to do that in front of a stranger. She was tired of being invisible, he said. Yes. And I made her invisible. Hana didn't answer that. She pulled the other chair, the one without her tote bag, closer to the bed and sat down on the opposite side. She took Zuri's hand, the one without the IV, and held it with the ease of someone who had held that hand before. She never blamed you, Hana said finally. I want to be clear about that. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. She looked across the bed at him. There's a difference. Angry means you're still fighting for something. Tired means you've made peace with the fact that some things aren't going to change. The room held that thought for a long time. Some things can change, Min-jae said. Hana looked at him. Her assessment was still running. He could feel it. She would say, Hana said slowly, that's what everyone says. I know. And she would say the problem with people who have power is that change for them is always optional. They can decide to be different on a Tuesday and still go back to who they were on Wednesday because nothing actually required the change. I know, Min-jae said again. So what makes this Tuesday different? He looked at Zuri, at the IV line, at the bruising along her collarbone above the bandaged shoulder, at her face, which was still, which was resting in a way she almost never rested. She stepped in front of the bullet, he said, because she had already decided to leave. She had made peace with leaving. She owed me nothing. He stopped. And she still did it. Hana was quiet. That kind of person, Min-jae said, deserves a different kind of world than the one I've been running. He exhaled slowly. That's what makes this Tuesday different. Hana looked at him for a long moment. She did not say she believed him. She did not say she didn't. She turned back to Zuri and adjusted her grip on Zuri's hand, and the room settled into a silence that was not comfortable, but was at least honest. His phone rang at 6:47 p.m. It was Cho. Yu-tae Yang had moved. Not fleeing. Moving toward a meeting location. A restaurant in Flushing. A private back room. The kind of arrangement that meant he was finally meeting with his client to explain why the job had gone wrong. The Reyes connection. Min-jae stood in the hospital corridor with the phone against his ear and thought about every version of this moment he had lived before. He knew what the expected response was. He knew what his organization expected. He knew what the calculus of his world demanded. He also knew that sitting in that room for the past 8 hours, reading Zuri's notebook and looking at her face and listening to what Hana Lim had told him, had done something to the machinery inside him that he didn't have clean language for yet. Put a team on the location, he said. I want it contained. I want you, and I want whoever he's meeting with. And I don't want either of them harmed until I've talked to them personally. A pause. Sir, the standard response to an assassination attempt would suggest... I know what it would suggest, Min-jae said. I'm not asking for the standard response. He looked at the door to Zuri's room. Get me the meeting location and keep the team in position. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He went back into the room. Hana looked up. I have to go, Min-jae said. She nodded. Will you? He stopped, started again. Don't leave her alone tonight. Hana looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. I wasn't planning to, she said. He picked up the white lilies from the water pitcher, smoothed the stems, and laid them on the nightstand where Zuri could see them if she opened her eyes. Then he looked at her face one more time. The stillness, the monitors, the south-facing window going dark now as the city swallowed the last of the evening light. He had spent 6 years not looking. He intended to make up for that, but first there was something that needed to be handled, and the way he handled it tonight was going to determine, more than any promise made in a hospital room, what kind of man he was actually going to be when the Tuesday became Wednesday. He walked out. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt, in the particular silence of that corridor, like something ending and something else beginning, and neither one of those things was going to be easy. The restaurant in Flushing had no sign above the door. That was how you knew it was the kind of place where people said things they didn't want remembered. No sign meant no record of having been there. No record meant the conversation technically never happened. Min Jae had eaten in rooms like this his entire adult life. He understood the grammar of them. His team had the block contained within 20 minutes of Cho's call. 4 vehicles, 12 men, positioned at the 2 exits and the alley access and the front entrance in a pattern that looked, to anyone walking past on the street, like nothing at all. This was the thing civilians never understood about how his world operated. The most dangerous arrangements were always the quietest ones. Nobody standing in the cold with visible weapons. Just parked cars and men with their hands in their pockets who happened to know exactly where everyone inside the building was standing. Min Jae went in through the kitchen. The kitchen staff looked at him, and at the 2 men behind him, and made the collective decision to become very interested in whatever was on the stove. Min Jae walked through the heat and the smell of frying oil and pushed open the door to the back corridor and stood there for a moment, listening. 2 voices. One was Yoo Tae-young's. He'd heard recordings, knew the slightly raspy quality of it, the way the man talked faster when he was nervous. The other voice was lower, measured, doing the thing that careful men do in uncomfortable conversations, which is talk slowly to signal that they are not afraid, even when they are. Min Jae pushed open the backroom door. The 2 men at the table looked up. Yoo Tae-young's face went the color of old ash. He had a glass of something in his hand, and it stopped moving halfway to the table. The other man did not change expression. Min Jae recognized him in the same moment that he understood, with a particular lurching clarity, that something was wrong with the shape of what he was seeing. The man sitting across from Yoo Tae-young was not connected to Reyes. He was connected to Min Jae. His name was Jung Hyun-woo, and he had been Min Jae's financial director for 7 years. Bochiend. The 3 seconds after Min Jae registered Jung's face were the quietest 3 seconds he could remember in recent experience. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that exists in the half-second after a car accident, before the pain arrives and before the brain has caught up to what the body already knows. Jung Hyun-woo. 51 years old, precise, conservative, loyal, or so the record read. Min Jae had promoted him twice, had trusted him with the organization's most sensitive financial architecture, had stood beside him at his daughter's wedding 3 years ago and drunk too much whiskey and listened to Jung give a speech about the importance of people who stayed. "Close the door," Min Jae said. The man behind him closed it. Yoo Tae-young set his glass down. His hand was shaking slightly, and he was trying to stop it from shaking, which made it more obvious. Jung Hyun-woo looked at Min Jae with an expression that was working to stay neutral and not entirely succeeding. There was something underneath the neutrality. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. The look of a man who has been expecting a specific door to open and is managing the fact that it has finally opened. "Sit down, Min Jae," Jung said. "I'll stand. There are things you need to hear, and I would prefer, Min Jae said very quietly, "that you explain to me what you're doing in a room with the broker who arranged the attempt on my life." The word arranged landed on Yoo Tae-young like a physical weight. He made a small, involuntary sound and pushed his chair back an inch and stopped himself from pushing it further. Jung did not flinch. "I'm the one who arranged it," he said. "You was the instrument. I was the client." The room did not move. Min Jae's 2 men behind him did not move. Min Jae himself did not move. "Say that again," Min Jae said. "I arranged the attempt," Jung said. His voice was level in a way that cost him something to maintain. Min Jae could see the cost of it in the muscles at the side of his jaw. The Reyes connection in the financial chain was deliberate misdirection. I knew your team would find it if they looked. I needed them looking in the wrong direction long enough to give me room to manage the fallout. Min Jae looked at the man he had trusted with 7 years of his organization's financial life and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was mostly a cold, settling recognition. The recognition of a person who has been wrong about something fundamental and is now in the process of understanding exactly how wrong and exactly how long. Why? Min-jae said. One word. Jung exhaled. He folded his hands on the table. He had always had the hands of someone precise, the fingers even, the nails kept, no unnecessary movement. Because you were going to find out, he said, about the Harlem accounts, about the diversion structure, and when you found out, what happened next was going to be predictable. A pause. I was managing the predictable. Min-jae stared at him. The Harlem accounts. Jung looked at him steadily. 22 million over 3 years, structured across 6 operating entities. The architecture was clean. I did not expect it to surface. What surfaced it? A pause that lasted slightly too long. Zuri Coleman, Jung said. The sound of her name in this room, from this man, in this context, was something Min-jae felt in his back teeth. Explain that, Min-jae said. 8 months ago, she filed a security memo that included a financial anomaly flag. She wasn't looking at the accounts directly. She doesn't have that access. But she was cross-referencing security expenditures against operational records, which she apparently did regularly as part of her threat assessment work. And she identified a discrepancy in the Harlem operational budget that she flagged as potentially indicating undisclosed third-party payments. Min-jae remembered the memo. He had read it twice this morning. In the section on financial indicators, secondary, she had written, discrepancy identified in H District operational disbursements, Q2 to Q3. Pattern is consistent with either administrative error or undisclosed third-party arrangement. Recommend internal review. He had read it this morning and thought it was peripheral to the main security content. He had moved on. She was right, Jung said. She had identified the edge of the structure. If anyone had followed the thread, he stopped. The memo went to the security team. Park didn't route it to finance. Under normal circumstances, that's where it would have ended. But she followed up, quietly, through administrative channels. She requested budget reconciliation documents from my department 4 weeks ago. Jung looked at his folded hands. My assistant flagged the request to me. At that point, I understood that the thread was going to be followed regardless of whether the memo had been acted on. Min-jae said nothing. She was going to find it, Jung said, not because she was investigating me specifically, because that's how she works. She pulls threads. He looked up. You know that's how she works. So you tried to kill me, Min-jae said, before she found the accounts, before I could be told. If you were dead, the succession structure would have moved to the Emergency Leadership Council. The accounts would have been absorbed into the transition review and buried. The thread she was pulling would have died with you, organizationally speaking. Jung said it without apology and without pleasure, the tone of a man presenting a cost-benefit analysis. It was the most efficient solution. The most efficient solution. Min-jae looked at the man who had stood at his right side for 7 years and called eliminating his life the most efficient solution, and something inside his chest went very still. Not the performing stillness. The real kind. The kind that comes after everything else has burned off. She took the bullet, Min-jae said. The bullet you ordered. She took it. Jung's composure fractured slightly for the first time. Something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of something human, but it was brief and he contained it. I did not anticipate. Nobody anticipated her, Min-jae said. That's been the consistent failure in this organization for 6 years. Nobody anticipated her. He looked at Yu Tae-yang, who had been sitting with the stillness of a man attempting to become part of the furniture. You, Min-jae said. Yu's eyes moved to him. You'll give my team everything, every communication, every instruction, every financial record attached to this arrangement. You'll do this voluntarily and completely. Yu nodded. The nodding had a slightly frantic quality. Good. Min-jae looked back at Jung. Stand up. Jung stood. You're going to come with me, Min-jae said, and we're going to have a much longer conversation than this one. And then? The question was sincere. Young Hyun Woo was 51 years old and had spent his life in rooms where the answer to that question was understood by everyone present. He was asking it anyway because he was, at the bottom of everything else, a precise man who preferred explicit information to implication. Min-jae looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know yet," he said, which was true, and which was, if Young had known him as well as he thought he did, the most frightening answer Min-jae could have given, because the man Jung had arranged to have killed would have had an immediate and predictable answer to that question. The man standing in this room did not. That was either better or worse, and Young Hyun-woo didn't know which, and that uncertainty was the thing that finally, visibly, shook him. They brought Young back to the building, not to the operations room. Min-jae put him in a conference room on the 6th floor, the one without windows, the one used for sensitive conversations, with 2 men outside the door and a third inside who had instructions to be present but silent. Then Min-jae went to his own office for the first time since the previous evening and sat behind his own desk and looked at the surface of it, which was exactly as he'd left it, and tried to inventory what the last 18 hours had done to his understanding of his own organization. His financial director had embezzled $22 million over 3 years. His financial director had then arranged his assassination to prevent discovery. The discovery that had triggered the assassination attempt had originated with his executive secretary through a routine cross-reference she'd performed as part of security work that was not technically her job, while also preparing to resign. His security team had failed to act on her warning about the shooter. His security team had failed to act on 11 formal threat flags she had submitted over 4 years. The woman who had done more to protect his organization than any single person currently drawing a salary from it had been sitting 3 steps behind him for 6 years, and he had been treating her like a very good calendar. He picked up the phone and called Cho. "I need the complete financial audit on Young Hyun Woo started tonight," he said. "Full scope. Everything. Use the external firm, so don't use internal accounting." A pause. "And I need you to pull Zuri Coleman's last budget reconciliation request, the one she sent to Young's department 4 weeks ago. Get me every document she requested and the response she received." And Cho was quiet for a moment. "Sir, Young's department responded to that request with a set of documents. I can pull them." "Were they accurate?" "I'd have to review them against the underlying accounts." "Do that." He hung up and sat for another moment. Then he called Park. "Your team," he said when Park answered. "The internal integrity of your team. How confident are you?" A pause. "Sir?" Young Hyun Woo was running a diversion structure for 3 years. He did this within this organization. He had access to operational information that should have limited visibility. I want to know if anyone on your team was aware of or connected to his arrangement. The silence on Park's end had a quality to it, the quality of a man recalibrating. "I would need to. How confident are you? Number." 70%, Park said after a moment. "Maybe 75. "That's not a confidence level. That's a liability." "I understand. I want internal review on every member of your team who had contact with Young's department in the past 3 years. Don't tell them what you're looking for. Start with the 2 team members who were responsible for the threat assessment going into the gala." He stopped. "And Sung-ho?" "Sir." "The fact that Zuri Coleman's security work was more effective than your team's output over 4 years. I don't need that explained to me. I need it fixed. I need to know what structural changes make this organization impossible to compromise from the inside. I need that analysis on my desk by the end of the week." "Understood." Min-jae hung up. He sat in his office and the building moved around him. The sounds of an organization operating, phones, footsteps, muffled conversation. And he thought about $22 million and a notebook full of meticulous care and a woman who had decided to leave and stepped in front of a bullet anyway. He thought about Young's voice saying most efficient solution. He thought about Zuri's handwriting saying, "Don't let him skip breakfast before dangerous negotiations." He stayed in the office for 40 minutes, and then he went back to the 6th floor conference room. Tolko. Young Hyun Woo had not moved from where they'd put him. He was sitting straight in the conference chair with his hands folded on the table, the same position as in the restaurant, and he watched Min Jae come in and take the chair across from him with the careful attention of a man who is trying to read which version of the next few hours he is about to experience. 22 million, Min Jae said. Approximately. The external audit will give you the precise figure. Over 3 years. Yes. For what? Jung looked at him. I'm sorry? What did you do with it? Min Jae leaned back in his chair. 22 million over 3 years. That's not a number you take because you're careless. That's a number with a purpose. What was the purpose? Jung looked at his hands. For the first time since the restaurant, something in his posture shifted. Not collapsing, but settling, the way a structure settles when it stops pretending to support weight it can no longer hold. My son, he said. Min Jae waited. He has been building a company for 4 years. Legitimate business, technology, software development. He needed capital. The legal channels were... Jung stopped. The structure of my legitimate assets made it complicated to provide that capital without triggering... You were protecting your visible income. I was protecting the separation between my legitimate life and this one. Jung looked up. You know that separation exists for everyone in this organization. You maintain it yourself. I don't fund it with money I took from the people who trusted me. The sentence landed. Jung's jaw moved slightly. The accounts, Min Jae said. The Harlem operational budget. That money came from operations that my people put their lives into. Some of them lost things for those operations. You took 22 million from people who bled for it, and you put it into your son's software company. It wasn't... Jung stopped himself. He started again. I intended to replace it. The structure was designed to allow replacement over a 5-year period without... You intended to replace it after arranging for me to be dead. Min Jae's voice was still cold, still even. Your replacement plan required my death, Hyunwoo, because while I was alive, Zuri was going to find the accounts, and then I was going to find out. And your replacement plan becomes irrelevant. He stopped. You didn't intend to replace it. You intended to survive long enough to not have to. Young Hyun-woo was quiet for a long time. The third man in the room, the silent one, standing by the far wall, had not moved since Min Jae came in. Your son, Min Jae said. Does he know where the capital came from? Something crossed Young's face that was different from everything that had preceded it. Rawer, less managed. No, he said. Does he know what you do? He knows the outline, but not the specifics. No. Min Jae looked at the man across the table. He looked at the precise hands and the gray at his temples and thought about the wedding 3 years ago, the speech about people who stay, the whiskey, and the particular warmth of an evening when you believe you know someone. How old is your son? Min Jae said. Jung's eyes moved to him with a quality in them that was almost dangerous, not threatening, but exposed. The look of a man who does not want to talk about his son in this room for very specific and desperate reasons. 26, he said. And the company. Is it real? Yes. Is it viable? A pause. The last projections were positive, yes. So your son built something real, Min Jae said, and you decided the way to support that was to steal from the people around you and arrange a murder. The word murder sat on the table between them. I did not begin with that decision, Jung said quietly. The first diversion was, it began as a short-term bridge. 3 months. The accounts would be balanced before the quarterly review. He looked at his hands. 3 months became 6. 6 became a year. The structure became more complex because it needed to be, to accommodate the growing discrepancy. And then, the memo. He exhaled. By the time the memo arrived, the structure was too large to unwind quietly. The only clean exit required, my death, Min Jae said. You keep arriving at my death as the clean exit. Yes. And Zuri Coleman in a hospital bed. Jung said nothing. She spent 6 years protecting this organization, Min Jae said. She spent years protecting you, specifically, without knowing it, flagging threats, managing exposures, watching patterns that your security clearance would have made visible if you'd been paying attention. She protected you the same way she protected everyone else in this building. And then she found the thread you left and you put a bullet in her. I did not intend. It doesn't matter what you intended. For the first time, something moved in Min Jae's voice. Not volume, something beneath the volume. She is unconscious in a hospital room, and you are the reason. Whatever you intended, that is what exists. Jung closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the composure was still there, but it had stopped pretending to be something other than what it was, which was the last thing he had left to hold on to. What happens now? He said. Now I go back to the hospital, Min Jae said. And you sit here and wait. And my team goes through every account you've touched for 7 years, and every communication you've had with Yu Tae-young, and every financial record associated with your son's company, and I find out exactly what exists. He stood. And then I'll know what happens next. He walked to the door. Min Jae? Jung's voice. Quiet. Using the name without the title, the way he hadn't since the early years. Min Jae stopped. The security memo she filed, Jung said. The one that started this. Your security team didn't act on it. If they had, I know, Min Jae said, she would have been protected. The shooter would never have been necessary because I would have been investigated before, I know. Min Jae's hand was on the door frame. He did not turn around. My organization failed her, starting 8 months ago and before that, and continuing up until the moment she stepped in front of that gun. He stopped. You used that failure. You built your plan around the fact that this organization was not going to take her seriously. He turned his head slightly, not quite looking back. That failure belongs to me. What you did with it belongs to you. He walked out. He was in the elevator going down when his phone rang. The screen said Hana Lim, and his stomach tightened in a specific way before he answered. She's awake, Hana said. He heard it and stood very still in the moving elevator. She woke up about 20 minutes ago, Hana continued. She's disoriented. She's in pain. The nurses are with her. A pause. She asked about your morning schedule. He breathed in once, slowly. Tell her... He stopped. Tell her I canceled everything. A moment of quiet on Hana's end, then, she's going to ask why. Tell her I'll explain when I get there. He arrived at the ground floor and walked through the lobby and into the night air, and for the first time in 24 hours, the city felt like it had a temperature, cold and real and specific. A cab went past throwing yellow light across the wet pavement. Someone on the corner was talking on a phone in Mandarin. A delivery truck double-parked had its hazards going. Orange, 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 patient and indifferent. He stood on the sidewalk and called for the car, and while he waited, he stood in the cold and let the city be the city around him, not requiring anything from it, not performing anything for it. He thought about what Hana had said. She asked about your morning schedule, even waking up from surgery, even disoriented and in pain and coming back from wherever the unconscious goes. He thought about the notebook, the entry from 6 years ago about breakfast before dangerous negotiations. He thought about the man upstairs in the 6th-floor conference room with his hands folded on a table. He thought about $22 million and a software company and a 26-year-old who did not know. The car pulled up. He got in. He had spent the last 24 hours discovering that the person who knew his life most completely had been 3 steps behind him and invisible, and that the people he had trusted most completely had been looking him in the eye and lying, and that the only way forward through all of it required him to become a different kind of man than the one who had walked into that museum gala the previous evening. He didn't know yet if he was capable of that. He was going to find out. The car hit the FDR, and Min Jae sat in the back with his phone in his hand and did not look at it. 20 minutes to the hospital. The driver knew not to talk. The city streaked past the window in the specific way it does at night when you're moving fast and not seeing any of it, just the blur of light against wet asphalt, orange and white, and the occasional red of a brake light flaring up like something urgent and then gone. His phone buzzed. Cho. He answered. The financial audit is started, Cho said. External firm, as you requested. They'll have a preliminary scope by morning. A pause. Sir, there's something else. Say it. The documents Young's department sent Zuri in response to her reconciliation request. I pulled them. Another pause, shorter and more loaded. They're fabricated. The account figures are clean. They don't match the underlying records. She would have seen that the moment she compared them to the operational expenditure logs she already had. Min-jae looked at the passing lights. She would have known they were falsified. Within probably one review cycle, yes. She's thorough enough that she already knew, Min-jae said. It landed as he said it, the way things land when you've been circling them and finally step into the center. She didn't file a follow-up because she was building a complete picture first. She doesn't escalate incomplete information. He thought about the notebook, the meticulous cross-referencing, the quarterly updates on threat protocols. She was going to bring me a finished case. That would be consistent with, she was 3 weeks from resigning, Min-jae said. She was going to give me a finished case before she left. That was her exit. He stopped. He tried to kill me because she was 3 weeks away from handing me everything. The car moved through the night. Cho, Min-jae said. Sir, how many people in this organization knew about Jung's arrangement? The silence was 4 seconds long. I don't know yet. How many people could have known? Structurally. Based on the account access required to move that volume over 3 years without internal detection. Moving that volume cleanly across 6 entities would have required cooperation from, or at minimum, willful blindness from, at least 2 people inside the finance structure below Jung, possibly a third. Cho paused. And sir, the pre-event security assessment for the gala, the threat assessment that missed the badge irregularity that Zuri flagged. I've been pulling the chain on who authored that assessment. Min-jae waited. It was authored by a team member named Kwon Jae-hyun. He's been on the security team for 3 years. Before joining us, he worked through a staffing agency that I'm now running against our known contact lists. Cho's voice was steady, but the steadiness was deliberate. The agency has a connection to a shell entity that appears in Jung's diversion structure. The car was silent, except for the engine and the sound of the city outside. Kwon placed the shooter in the gala, Min-jae said. I believe so, yes. Through the catering subcontract. That would be the mechanism, yes. And Kwon authored the threat assessment that conveniently missed the badge irregularity that Zuri flagged. Yes. Where is Kwon now? That's the other reason I'm calling. Cho exhaled. He hasn't reported in since this morning. His apartment is empty. His phone is going to voicemail. Min-jae felt the cold clarity that arrives when a situation stops being complicated and becomes simple. Not easy. Simple. The kind of simple that requires immediate action and does not wait for comfortable timing. Find him, Min-jae said. Tonight. I need to know what else he knows and who else he's connected to. He paused. And Cho. If he runs toward something. Find out what he's running toward. He hung up. The hospital entrance was 2 blocks ahead. Zuri was awake. That was the first thing, the specific physical fact of it. Her eyes were open, and they were tracking, and they held that quality he recognized from 6 years of working beside her, the watchful alertness, the assessment happening behind them. Dimmer than usual, the assessment running on partial power. But running. She was sitting up slightly, the hospital bed adjusted to maybe 30 degrees, and there was a nurse finishing something at the IV stand, and Hana was in the chair beside the bed with her hand wrapped around Zuri's, and an expression of relief so visible it was almost uncomfortable to look at. Zuri looked at Min-jae when he came in. He stopped in the doorway. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at his calendar when it had an anomaly she hadn't put there, evaluating, trying to determine whether the thing she was seeing matched the thing she expected. You canceled everything, she said. Her voice was rough from the tube they'd removed, and quiet, and she was choosing words carefully the way you do when speaking costs something physical. Yes. The Reyes negotiation is not happening today. Her eyes moved over him. The suit he was wearing, a different one from the gala, but she probably noted that. The specific quality of tiredness on his face, the thing he was carrying that was not his usual weight. What happened? She said. The nurse finished and left. Hana looked at Min-jae. He looked back at her, and something in his face communicated something, because Hana stood slowly and said to Zuri, "I'll be right outside." And Zuri looked at her with an expression that said they were going to discuss that decision later, and Hana left. Min-jae pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. He looked at her face for a moment, the bruising at her collarbone, the bandaged shoulder, the IV line running into the back of her hand. "Jung Hyun-woo arranged the shooting," he said. He watched her face. There was a half-second of something, not surprise exactly, more the look of a person who has been tracking a set of numbers and just had the sum confirmed. "The financial discrepancy," she said. "Yes." "I wasn't certain," she said. "I had the falsified documents from his department. I needed the underlying tspot." "I know," Min-jae said. "You were building the case." She looked at him. "You read the reconciliation request." "I read everything," he said. "Your security protocols, the root variance logs, the contingency files." He paused. "The notebook." Something shifted in her expression. Small, barely visible. The particular expression of a person who has kept something private for a long time and is processing the fact that it no longer is. "The notebook was personal," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." She looked at the window, the city outside, dark and indifferent, doing what cities do. "What are you going to do about Jung?" "That's being worked on." "His son doesn't know," she said. Min-jae looked at her. "How do you know about his son?" "Because I've been doing financial cross-referencing on this organization for 4 years, and Jung's son's company started receiving unusually large capital injections in the same quarter that the Harlem discrepancies began." She said it without emphasis, without looking away from the window. "I pulled the company's public filings. The capital structure doesn't match Jung's declared personal assets. It wasn't hard to see." A pause. "His son thinks the money is clean. You can tell from the way the company operates. Totally legitimate, proper accounting, proper reporting. He didn't know." "I came to the same conclusion," Min-jae said. Zuri turned back from the window. She looked at him directly. "What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet." She studied his face. "You could use it," she said. "The son. As leverage." "Yes." "Are you going to?" He looked at her. "No." Something in her face shifted again, assessing. "Why not?" "Because using an innocent person as leverage is—" He stopped. He thought about what he was going to say and decided to say the true version instead of the polished version. "Because I've been reading what you wrote for 6 years, and I don't think that's the kind of organization you were protecting." The monitors beeped. Outside in the hallway, someone walked past. Zuri looked at him for a long moment. "You were going to say something else," she said, "before you said that." "Yes." "What?" "I was going to say it was bad strategy," which is also true. "But it's not the only reason." She held his eyes. She was clearly tired. The specific tiredness of someone operating on reduced reserves and choosing carefully what to spend. But the eyes behind the tiredness were fully present, fully her. "You found the notebook," she said quietly. "Yes." "Then you know I was leaving." "Yes." She looked at the IV line, then back at him. "I'm not going to apologize for that decision. I'm not asking you to. It was the right decision, based on the information I had at the time." "I know." "What happened at the gala doesn't—" She stopped, breathed. The breath cost her something across the shoulder. "What happened doesn't change the reasons I made that decision." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him with the evaluating look. "Then what are you doing here at—" She glanced at the window, at the darkness. "Whatever time it is." 10:47, he said. "What are you doing here at 10:47 instead of managing what sounds like a significant organizational crisis?" He leaned forward, elbows on knees. He was close enough to the bed that he could see the precise line where the bruising at her collarbone changed color. He kept his eyes on her face. "The organizational crisis is being managed, by people I'm paying to manage it." He paused. "I'm here because you woke up, and I needed to see that you woke up." Zuri said nothing. "And because there are things I should have said a long time ago," he continued, And I understand if you don't want to hear them tonight while you're in a hospital bed. But I'm not willing to keep not saying them and wait for a better time that I don't get to guarantee. She looked at him, the evaluation running, the assessment. Say them, she said. He said them. Not smoothly, not in the ordered way he conducted negotiations, where each point built on the last and the structure carried the listener somewhere he'd already decided they were going. He said them the way you say things when you've been awake for 36 hours and read someone's private notebook and sat in a restaurant in Flushing and looked at the face of a man you trusted who had tried to have you killed, which is to say, without architecture, without performance, in the plain and slightly ragged language of something true. He told her what he'd found in the files, not the security protocols or the root variances. She knew those, she'd built them. He told her what it was like to read them as an outside person, to understand from the outside what she'd been doing for 6 years, the scope of it, the consistency of it, the fact that she had built a parallel protective infrastructure for his life using only her own judgment and administrative access, and had never once mentioned it or asked for anything in return. He told her about the lilies, the receipt for every year on the anniversary of his mother's death, the thing that had hit him, sitting in her office at 5 a.m. when he found that receipt. He told her he didn't know her birthday. He said it plainly, not as self-flagellation. As a fact, he was putting on the table between them because it was true, and she already knew it, and pretending it wasn't true would be an insult to both of them. She listened. She did not fill the silences. She did not make it easier for him. She sat with the IV line in her hand and her shoulder bandaged and her voice rough, and she listened to all of it, and her face was unreadable in the specific way her face was unreadable when she was taking in information and had not yet decided what to do with it. When he was finished, the room was quiet for a moment. April 14th, she said. He looked at her. My birthday, she said. April 14th. He held that for a moment. I'm going to remember that. You might want to write it down. Something moved in his chest that was not comfortable and not uncomfortable, just real, the way real things are, occupying space regardless of whether you invited them. Zuri? Don't, she said, not unkindly. Don't make promises tonight. You're running on no sleep and a crisis and whatever version of guilt this is. Promises made in those conditions aren't worth much, he finished. I know. They're worth less than nothing, she said, because they feel real to the person making them, and then the conditions change, and the person forgets what the conditions felt like, and the promise becomes a thing that happened once. She looked at her hand, the one with the IV. I've spent 6 years watching you make commitments in pressure moments and spend the next 6 months quietly renegotiating them. He did not argue this. It was true. What I want from you, she said slowly, like she was choosing each word individually, if you want to talk about what comes next, is not promises. I want to see what you do on a Tuesday 3 months from now when there's nothing urgent and nobody in a hospital bed and the pressure is gone and it's just a regular Tuesday. She looked at him. That's when character shows up, not tonight. Okay, he said. Okay, she said back. The monitors beeped. He reached over and straightened the white lilies on the nightstand, the ones he'd arranged in the water pitcher earlier, and she watched him do it. You brought those, she said. Yes. She looked at them. You figured out the lilies. The receipt. She nodded slightly. Then, she would have liked you, she said quietly. Your mother. I think she would have found you very frustrating, and she would have liked you anyway. He looked at her. You think about that? Sometimes. She closed her eyes for a moment. The pain moving through her was visible in the small tension around her mouth. I'll be out of here in a week, maybe less if I'm cooperative. The shoulder is going to need rehab. A pause. I'll need you to have someone cover the morning logistics while... Stop, he said. She opened her eyes. You're not covering the morning logistics, he said. You're not doing anything for this organization until you're fully recovered. And when you do come back, if you come back, it's not going to be the same role. She looked at him with the evaluating look. What role? I don't know yet. That's something we discuss when you're not on morphine. He paused. But not 3 steps behind me, not invisible. Whatever it is, it's not that. She held his eyes for a moment. I'll think about it, she said. That was, he understood, the best answer he was going to get tonight. And it was a real answer, not a deflection. And he took it. Meh. His phone vibrated at 11:23. He looked at the screen. Cho. He stepped into the hall. "We found Kwan," Cho said. His voice had a quality in it that told Min-jae the news was not going to be simple. "He's at a location in Queens, industrial building, Astoria. He's not alone." "How many?" "We count 8 individuals, armed. The building has been active since around 9 p.m. A pause. "Sir, we're picking up communication traffic from the building. Encrypted, but the pattern is consistent with coordination of a time-sensitive operation." Min-jae stood in the hospital corridor with the beige paint and the fluorescent lights and the sound of the nursing station down the hall. "They're not running," he said. "No, sir." "They're staging." "That's our assessment." "For what target?" Cho was quiet for 3 seconds. "The communication traffic includes references to a hospital location, 7th floor, private suite." The fluorescent light hummed above him. "They're coming for her," Min-jae said. "That's what the traffic suggests. If Kwan was Jung's inside man and Jung is now in custody and has presumably given up details under pressure—" "Jung hasn't given up anything," Min-jae said. "He's been sitting in a conference room." "Then Kwan may have his own contingency. If the primary target survived and the financial director is compromised, eliminating the witness who can confirm the financial case," Cho stopped. "She's the one who built the evidence. Without her testimony and her documentation, the case against Jung is harder to prosecute, inside or outside." Min-jae was already moving back toward the room. "How long?" "Unknown. The staging suggests they're waiting for a window. Shift change at the hospital is midnight. That's the most likely." 23 minutes, Min-jae said. "Yes. I need people here now, not in 20 minutes. Now." "I have a team 7 minutes out. They're moving." 7 minutes is too long if they move early. He was at the door to Zuri's room. He pushed it open. She was still awake, eyes tracking to him immediately, reading his face. Hana was back in the chair. Both of them read him in the same instant, and both of them straightened. "What?" Zuri said. "We need to move you," Min-jae said. He was already looking at the room layout. The door, the window, the connecting bathroom. "Right now." "What's happening?" "Kwan is staging a team. They're coming here." He crossed to the window and looked at the street below. 7 floors down, the hospital entrance, the ambulance bay. 2 parked cars on the opposite side that he was going to assume were clean because he didn't have time to assume anything else. "They want to eliminate the financial evidence. That's you." Zuri looked at him. She was pulling the IV line in her hand taut slightly, not panicking, assessing. "How long?" "Maybe 20 minutes, maybe less." "Your team?" 7 minutes out. She did the math. He watched her do it. "That's a window," she said. "Yes." "How many are there?" 8 confirmed. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds and then opened them. "The connecting room," she said. "Through the bathroom. Is it occupied?" He had not checked. He moved to the bathroom, opened the connecting door, looked into the adjacent room. Empty. Dark. The bed made with the particular tightness of rooms waiting. "Empty," he said. "Move me there. Kill the lights in this room. Leave the monitors running. Anyone checking the room from outside will see active signals." She was already moving, pushing herself upright, the shoulder making the movement cost her visibly. Her jaw tightened, but she did not stop. "They'll breach this room first. Your team arrives while they're in an empty room." He was beside her in 3 steps. "Stop moving. I'm not going to lie here and wait. You have a fractured shoulder blade. I'm aware of what I have." Her eyes when she looked at him were very direct, not angry, focused in the specific way she focused on logistics problems. "Help me or get out of the way." He helped her. Hana was already on her feet, gathering the overnight bag, her face pale but her movements controlled. Min-jae supported Zuri's weight on her right side, the undamaged side, and they moved through the bathroom into the dark adjacent room, and Zuri sat on the edge of the bed, and her breathing was sharp and shallow, and she was very white around the mouth, but she was upright and awake. and tracking. Go back and kill the lights, she said to Minji. Leave the monitors. I'm not leaving you. I'll be here. Hana's here. Your job is the room. She looked at him with the look that was not a request. Go. He went. He killed the lights in her room. The monitors kept their rhythm, the green lines tracing their steady evidence that someone was alive somewhere. From the hallway, it would look occupied. From the doorway, it would look like a patient asleep in a dark room. He stepped back into the connecting bathroom and pulled the door to within an inch of closed and looked at his watch. 11:29. His team was 5 minutes out now, if Cho's timing was right. Shift change in 9 minutes. He stood in the dark bathroom and breathed and listened to the hospital sounds. The nursing station, a cart in the hallway, the elevator somewhere below, and waited for the sound that would be different from those sounds. His phone buzzed. Cho. Team 4 minutes. Lobby team in position. Stairwell covered. He texted back. They come for 7th floor. Room 714. Connecting room has package. Do not breach 715. 3 seconds. Confirmed. Min-jae stood in the dark and pressed his back against the cold tile wall. Across the narrow gap of the cracked door in the dark room where the monitors beeped their steady false evidence, the empty hospital bed waited. Down the hall, the elevator hummed. He heard, beneath the institutional ambient noise, beneath the nursing station and the cart and the HVAC cycling through, a sound that was different from all of those sounds. Footsteps. More than one set. Moving with the particular cadence of people trying to sound like they belong somewhere they don't. He pushed the bathroom door to fully closed. He put his hand on the wall in the dark room where Zuri was sitting on the bed with Hana beside her, and her shoulder fractured and her face the color of old paper, and he felt her hand find his arm in the dark and grip it. Not the grip of someone afraid, the grip of someone who has assessed the situation, identified the variables, and is now simply waiting for the next thing to happen. He stood in the dark and held that grip and listened to the footsteps stop outside the door to room 714 and the sound of the handle and the door opening and the specific silence of armed men entering a room they think contains a sleeping woman and finding instead a dark room with a beeping monitor and an empty bed, and the half-second of confusion that followed, that critical, irreplaceable half-second before the hallway outside erupted with his team arriving and voices shouting and the particular controlled chaos of a situation going the way it was planned to go rather than the way someone else had planned for it to go. Zuri's grip on his arm did not loosen until it was over. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes that were loud and then suddenly quiet, the way those things always are. The violent, self-contained, and then done. The hallway going from chaos to the sound of his team's voices moving through their checklist, securing, confirming. The words coming through the door to him in short professional bursts that meant it was finished. He exhaled. In the dark, Zuri's grip loosened and she let go. Kwan, she said. Her voice was rough and steady. I'll find out, he said. A pause. Are you hurt? He said. No. A breath. My shoulder hates me, but no. He pushed the connecting door open. The lights from his team's equipment cut across the bathroom. He looked back at her in the half-light. Hana beside her, Zuri sitting upright on the edge of the bed, with her bandaged shoulder and her paper-white face and her eyes that were completely, absolutely present. Min-jae, she said. He stopped. This doesn't end with tonight. She said it without drama. A statement of operational fact. Jung Kwan, whoever else is in that structure. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know, he said. And when it gets worse, she said, you're going to be under pressure to handle it the way you've always handled things. He looked at her. I know, he said again. I'm telling you not to, she said. Her eyes held his directly, no deflection in them, nothing soft. Not because of what's right or wrong, because the way you've always handled things is why Jung spent 7 years building something inside your organization that nearly killed you. She stopped. The structure that allowed that to exist. That's what needs to change. Not just the people in it. He stood in the bathroom doorway and looked at the woman who had spent 6 years protecting him from the outside of his own blind spots. I know, he said, for the third time, and this time it meant something different from the first two times. She held his eyes for a moment more. Then she looked at Hana. "Help me back to the other room," she said. "I want my own bed." Hana moved. Min-jae stepped aside. As Zuri passed him in the narrow doorway, moving carefully, her right arm across Hana's shoulders, her left held close against her body, she paused. "April 14th, she said without looking at him. He understood what she meant. "I won't forget," he said. She moved past him into the room, and the monitors picked up their rhythm, and the city kept its indifferent motion beyond the window, and Min-jae stood in the doorway between the two rooms and understood, with a certainty he had not felt about anything in a long time, that what happened next was entirely up to him. Kwon Jae-hyun was in the hallway outside room 714 when Min-jae's team took him down, not running, not fighting, standing with his hands slightly raised and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has run the numbers and understood that the numbers no longer work in his direction. He was 34 years old, and he had the look of someone who had made a series of small compromises over a long period of time and had arrived at this hallway as the logical conclusion of all of them. Min-jae walked past the secured men on the floor, 4 of Kwon's team restrained, 2 others being managed at the stairwell exit, 1 in the elevator, and stopped in front of Kwon. Kwon looked at him. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You'll get one," Min-jae said. "After." "After what?" "After you tell me everyone connected to Young's arrangement inside this organization." Min-jae looked at him steadily. "You have one opportunity to give me that information voluntarily. What you do with that opportunity determines what the next several years of your life look like." Kwon looked at the floor. He looked at his hands, which were secured behind him and were not entirely steady. He looked at the door to room 714, which was open, and the empty bed inside with its monitors still running their false evidence. "She wasn't in the room," Kwon said. Flat. Not a question. "No." He absorbed this. "How long did you know we were coming?" "Long enough." Something moved across Kwon's face. Not quite respect, not quite resignation. The expression of a professional acknowledging that he had been outmaneuvered. "She told you to move her." Min-jae said nothing. "It was her idea," Kwon said. "It wasn't admiring exactly. It was something more tired than admiration." "Of course it was." "The names," Min-jae said. Kwon looked at him for another moment. Then he started talking. Total. It took 40 minutes and 3 people taking notes and 2 follow-up calls to Cho to cross-reference what Kwon was saying against organizational records. By the time it was done, they had 6 names. 2 in finance below Jung, 1 in logistics, 1 in the legal department who had been managing the shell entity documentation, 1 in external relations who had been the conduit to Yu Tai-young's broker network, and 1 name that hit the room differently from the others. Daniel Roshi, Min-jae's personal legal counsel. 15 years. The man who had drafted every significant contract the organization had executed in a decade and a half. The man whose office was on the same floor as Min-jae's own. Min-jae stood in the hallway and looked at Kwon's face when the name came out and saw that Kwon knew exactly what the name cost. He had saved it for last. Not as a weapon, more like a debt he was paying, the heaviest item settled at the end. "Rhee's involvement," Min-jae said. His voice was level. It cost him something to keep it level. "Characterize it." "He structured the shell entities," Kwon said. "The legal architecture that made the diversion traceable as Reyes connected rather than internal. He built the misdirection into the documentation from the beginning. He knew it was misdirection. He built it. Yes, he knew." Min-jae thought about Daniel Rahi. 15 years. The particular quality of that relationship, not friendship exactly, but the kind of professional closeness that accumulates over a decade and a half of working beside someone in high-stakes conditions. The wedding Rhee had attended. His daughter's graduation party that Min-jae had sent flowers to because Rhee had mentioned it twice with the particular tone of a man who wanted someone to notice it mattered. He thought about Zuri's notebook. The entry from 3 years ago. Recommend reviewing external legal counsel arrangement. Extended relationships in sensitive positions create structural risk regardless of individual loyalty. Standard rotation policy would mitigate. She had seen it. She had flagged it. Nobody had acted on it. He thought about what she had said in the dark room, with her hand on his arm, and her shoulder fractured, and the footsteps outside the door. The structure that allowed that to exist. That's what needs to change, not just the people in it. "You'll give my team a full written account tonight," Min-jae said to Kwon. "Every detail of your involvement, Jung's arrangement, Rahee's role, and the operational chain for the gala. Complete and accurate. If anything you give us later proves inconsistent with the underlying evidence, the terms of whatever comes next are void." He looked at the man his organization had hired and placed and trusted with security infrastructure. "Do you understand?" "Yes," Kwon said. Min-jae walked away. He called Daniel Rahee at 12:40 a.m. Rahee answered on the third ring, voice carrying the specific texture of a man who was awake and had been awake and was not surprised by the call. "Min-jae, I need you in the office at 7 a.m., Min-jae said. A pause. "Is this about the Jung situation?" The fact that he said Jung's name without being told confirmed everything Kwon had said. Min-jae registered this without letting it change his voice. 7 a.m., he said. "Be there." He hung up. He stood in the hospital corridor for a moment. The night staff moved past him with their carts and their quiet professional rhythms, and the building hummed its institutional hum, and Min-jae stood in it and let himself feel, briefly and without performance, what the last 24 hours had actually cost. Not in strategic terms, not in organizational terms. In the simple human terms of what it is to discover that the architecture of trust you have built your life inside has been compromised in more places than you knew, by more people than you knew, for longer than you knew. He had been running an empire. He had been certain of its structure, and a woman 3 steps behind him had been quietly watching the cracks form and filling them with her own hands, alone, without being asked, while everyone else either looked away or actively made the cracks wider. He went back into Zuri's room. She was in the bed. Hana was in the chair beside her, head drooped, asleep with her chin on her chest. Zuri was not asleep. She was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has been lying still and thinking for a long time. She heard him come in and turned her head. "Kwon gave up the full network," he said quietly, to not wake Hana. She nodded. "Processing." "Ree," she said. Not a question. He looked at her. "How long have you suspected?" 2 years, she said. "I didn't have enough to flag it formally. The shell entity pattern was consistent with his documentation style, but that's circumstantial." She paused. "I put it in the notebook." "I know. I read it." "And?" "I didn't recognize it for what it was until tonight." He sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. "I've been reading your work for 12 hours, and I'm still understanding things I missed the first time." She looked at the ceiling again. The monitors kept their rhythm. Hana's breathing was slow and even in the chair. "What are you going to do with Rishi?" "Handle it. Legally or otherwise." "Legally," he said. "All of it. Jung, Ri, Kwon, the full network. Lawyers, documentation, appropriate channels." He paused. "That's going to be complicated," she said. "Yes. Because appropriate channels and the kind of work your organization does don't sit easily together." "I know." She turned her head to look at him. "That's not a small thing you're saying." "I know that too." She studied him with the evaluating look. It was dimmer than usual. The medication, the fatigue, the blood loss she was still recovering from. But it was there. "You've been thinking about this for longer than tonight," she said. "Since I sat in your office at 5 in the morning and read your contingency protocols," he said. "Since I understood what you'd been protecting and what you'd built and what this organization looked like to someone who was watching it clearly." He exhaled. "You weren't protecting an empire. You were protecting people inside it. That's different from what I thought I was running." Zuri was quiet for a moment. "The drivers," she said. "The late-night staff. The programs you proposed that I finally approved while you were in surgery." He paused. 3 years late. 2.5, she said. "I first proposed them 2.5 years ago." 2.5 years late, he corrected. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, the precursor to one. You approved them. I approved them. And the medical support structure, and the family assistance fund. He looked at his hands. And I'm having the security team structure reviewed against your contingency protocol recommendations, which are more comprehensive than anything we currently have in place. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before. It wasn't the evaluating look. It was something quieter than that. Something that was deciding whether to let itself be something. Don't thank me, he said. I wasn't going to, she said. I was going to say that the security protocol review should be led by someone external. Park is good at his job and he's loyal, but he's been inside the same structure too long. He has the same blind spots the structure has. A pause. You need fresh eyes on it. I know. I'm looking for someone. I have a recommendation, she said. He looked at her. Former federal security analysis. She left the Bureau 3 years ago, and she's been consulting independently. She's the best I know at exactly this kind of structural assessment. A pause. Her name is Torres. I've been tracking her work for 2 years. You've been tracking potential security consultants for 2 years, Min-jae said. Someone had to. He looked at her for a moment. Then he took out his phone and typed the name. Torres. Security consultant. Former federal. He would have Cho run it in the morning. Sleep, he said. I'm not tired. Your body is tired. Your brain is refusing to acknowledge it. He leaned back in the chair. Sleep. I'll be here. She looked at him. You don't have to stay. I know. You have a 7 a.m. meeting that I can take from this chair if necessary. He settled into it. Sleep, Zuri. She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at the ceiling. Then, slowly, the tension in her face settled into something closer to rest, and her eyes closed and the monitors kept their rhythm. He stayed. The 7 a.m. meeting with Daniel Rhee lasted 11 minutes. Rhee came in knowing. That was the thing Min-jae had understood from the phone call. The absence of surprise in his voice, the specific quality of a man who had been waiting for a particular door to open. He sat across the desk from Min-jae, and he looked like 15 years, which is to say, he looked like someone who had let himself believe that long service was a kind of protection. Min-jae put the documentation on the desk. The shell entity records, the communication logs, Kwan's written account from the night before, the financial chain that Rhee had architectured. Rhee looked at it. He did not touch it. You're not going to tell me it's incomplete, Min-jae said. No, Rhee said. Or that there's context I'm missing. No. Good. Min-jae looked at him across the desk. At the man who had drafted every significant document in 15 years. The man who had, somewhere in the middle of those 15 years, decided that his skill set was available to the highest internal bidder. Why? P looked at the documentation. Young approached me 4 years ago. The first request was minor. Restructuring a single entity for cleaner documentation. Technically legal. I did it. He paused. The second request was more complex. By then I had already done the first one. The first one was leverage. His voice was even, recounting, not excusing. Each subsequent request was leverage against the one before. That's how these things work. You know that. I know how it works, Min-jae said. I'm asking why you let it start. Rhee was quiet for a moment. Because I thought it would stay small, he said, and because Young told me it would. Another pause. Which I knew, when he said it, was probably not true, and I chose to believe it anyway. Min-jae looked at him. At the careful face, at the 15 years in it. Your resignation, Min-jae said, effective today, written before you leave this building. And beyond that depends on how complete your cooperation is with the documentation review. Min-jae leaned forward slightly. Every entity you structured, every document you produced in connection with Young's arrangement, every communication you had with Young, Kwan, and the U broker chain, complete and accurate. My team will verify it against independent records. He paused. If what you give us is complete, I have no interest in what happens to you after you walk out of this building. If it's incomplete, it will be complete, Ree said. Min-jae looked at him for a long moment. 15 years. The wedding. The graduation flowers. The particular accumulation of a professional relationship that had existed in good faith on one side and had been compromised on the other for 4 years without him knowing. I trusted you, Min-jae said. Not as an accusation. The same flat factual register he'd used with Jung. Ree's jaw moved. I know. I want you to understand something, Min-jae said. The woman in the hospital, my secretary, she flagged the structural risk of long tenure relationships in sensitive positions 2 years ago. She recommended a rotation policy. He stopped. I didn't act on it. That failure is mine. But I want you to understand that she saw this coming. She saw it from the outside clearly and wrote it down, and nobody listened. He looked at Rishi. She's the one who built the evidence trail that surfaced Jung's arrangement. She's the one who took the bullet that was meant for me. And she's the reason you're sitting here in a structured conversation instead of something else. Ree looked at his hands on the table. I don't know if that means anything to you, Min-jae said, but I wanted you to know whose work you're sitting in the middle of. Ree didn't answer. His hands on the table were still. Write your resignation, Min-jae said. I'll have someone come in with the documentation protocol. He stood and left. What? The external audit of Jung Hyun-woo's financial arrangement was completed over the following 3 weeks. The final figure was $26,400,000, spread across 9 entities rather than the 6 Jung had described. The additional 3 had been set up in the final 8 months, the period after Zuri's reconciliation request had arrived on Jung's desk. He had been accelerating the extraction, building a deeper exit structure, while simultaneously arranging for the problem to be eliminated. The full accounting was delivered to Min-jae in a bound report on a Tuesday morning. He read it at his desk, his own office, and when he finished, he sat with it in front of him and thought about what $26 million looked like inside an organization, what it looked like to the drivers who ran night routes, and the staff who stayed late, and the people across every operation who had bled for the work those funds were drawn from. He thought about the programs he had approved while Zuri was in surgery. He called the assistant who was coordinating the program launch. The funding structure for the late-night transport program, he said, and the medical support fund and the family assistance framework. Yes, sir, we're finalizing the budget allocation. Increase the allocation, he said. Across all 3 programs, I'll send you the figure. He paused. And the Coleman Foundation, the educational scholarship structure Zuri proposed. Move the timeline up. I want the first scholarship cohort identified before the end of the quarter. A pause on the line. Sir, the Coleman Foundation, is that name confirmed? Yes, he said. It's confirmed. He hung up. He looked at the audit report on his desk for another moment. Then he closed it and set it in the drawer and did not take it out again. So, Zuri was discharged from the hospital 11 days after the shooting. The shoulder would require 4 months of rehabilitation. The physical therapist had given her a protocol, and she had read it twice and asked 3 follow-up questions, and the therapist had looked at her with the particular expression of a healthcare professional who has encountered a patient who is going to be either very easy or very difficult to work with, and has not yet determined which. Hana drove her home. It was a Tuesday, overcast, the city the color of old concrete in the November light. Zuri's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Crown Heights, and the elevator was working, and Hana walked her in and made tea and sat with her for 2 hours without being asked to and without being told to leave, which was the specific quality of their friendship distilled to a single afternoon. Min-jae had sent someone to the apartment the day before to stock the kitchen and confirm the elevator was functioning and install a temporary security camera at the entrance. And Hana had found the camera when she arrived and called Zuri to tell her, and Zuri had looked at the ceiling of her hospital room and said, "Of course he did," in a tone that was not entirely exasperated. He called at 3 p.m. when he calculated Hana would still be there and Zuri would have someone to hand the phone to if the call went sideways. Zuri answered on the 2nd ring. "You're home," he said. "I'm home." "The kitchen is fully stocked?" "Yes." including a particular brand of ginger tea that you apparently learned I drink from a note in my own personal notebook, which is a level of research I find thorough. I was going to say unsettling, a pause that was not quite a pause. Thank you. The physical therapy schedule, I have it. The therapist Cho identified is, I have my own therapist, she said. She's excellent, and I've already contacted her. A pause. The security camera at the entrance is temporary, he said, until the Quan network connections are fully confirmed and active. After that, your call. She was quiet for a moment. And the Torres recommendation. Cho met with her yesterday, Min-jae said. She's conducting an initial assessment next week. She'll have preliminary findings within 30 days. A pause. She's good. You were right. I usually am, Zuri said. And then before he could respond to that, how's the redocumentation review? Complete. His cooperation was thorough. Cho's legal team is working with the material. Young. The financial recovery process has begun. His son's company is not implicated and will not be. He stopped. That was the right call. I know, she said, not smugly, just confirming that the value had been correctly identified. The Coleman Foundation, he said, first scholarship cohort is being identified. 6 students, university level, fields open. The selection committee is being formed. He paused. I'd like your input on the selection criteria when you're ready. A longer silence this time. You named it, she said. Yes. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. She stopped. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, the particular quality of someone processing something they didn't expect. It's a lot. It is, he agreed. Min-jae. Yes. I haven't decided yet, she said, about coming back, about what that looks like. I know. I'm not going to be pressured into a decision because of programs and foundations, and I'm not pressuring you, he said. Those things exist because they should exist regardless of what you decide. They're not a recruitment mechanism. He paused. I should have built them 3 years ago because they were the right thing to build. I didn't. I'm building them now. That's separate from whatever you decide about your own life. Another silence. The ginger tea, she said finally. Yes. How did you know I drink it? The notebook, he said. You wrote that you kept it at your desk for mornings after particularly difficult client calls. You noted that it helped more than coffee for sustained focus. He paused. You wrote that in year 2. A very quiet sound on her end. It might have been a laugh. It was the kind of thing that might become a laugh given slightly different conditions. You read all of it, she said. Yes. Every entry. Yes. That really is unsettling. I know. But she stopped. Started again. But I also understand why you did. Yes. The line held between them. April 14th, he said. You remembered. I wrote it down, he said, and then I memorized it so I wouldn't need the paper. This time, the sound on her end was definitely the beginning of a laugh, stopped before it fully formed by the shoulder, which apparently objected. She made a small, involuntary sound of pain, and then a sound of irritation at the pain. Go rest, he said. I was going to say the same to you. I will when you do. That's not a competition I'm going to win, she said. Fine, I'll rest. A pause. Call me on Thursday. Not about work, just call me on Thursday. He said he would. He hung up and sat in his office and looked at the city through the window, which was November gray and completely indifferent, and felt something in his chest that had been absent for a long time, which was the sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not comfortable, not resolved, just located. 3 months passed. They passed the way months pass when you are rebuilding something from the inside, check. Slowly, visibly, with setbacks, and with the particular frustration of working on a structure while also living inside it. The 6 names from Kwan's account were processed through appropriate channels, which was complicated and took longer than Min-jae would have preferred and required the kind of patience he had historically not been good at exercising. He exercised it. The Torres assessment was delivered at the end of her 30-day engagement. It was 62 pages long, and it identified 11 structural vulnerabilities in the organization's security architecture and made specific recommendations for each one. Park Sung-ho read it and then called Min Jae and said, with the particular tone of a man who had just had his professional worldview significantly adjusted, that they should talk. They talked for 3 hours. Park emerged from that conversation with a list of changes he was implementing personally, a timeline, and the quiet determination of someone who has decided to be honest with himself about where he fell short and do something about it. Min Jae thought Zuri would approve of that. He called her on Thursdays. Not about work, as she had specified. They talked about other things. The novel she was reading, which was a reissue of a 1970s crime story she had opinions about. The rehabilitation schedule, which she found tedious and effective in equal measure. A documentary she had watched about the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge that she thought was the best thing she'd seen in years. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. He did not direct this conversation or manage it or use it for any purpose other than the stated one, which was to talk to her on Thursdays. It was a strange and new kind of thing for him, and he was not particularly good at it at the beginning, and he got less bad at it over time, which is the most that can be said for any skill you come too late. In January, the first Coleman Foundation Scholarship cohort was selected. 6 students, 3 in computer science, 1 in public health, 1 in architectural engineering, 1 in secondary education. The selection committee had developed criteria that emphasized demonstrated capability over conventional academic metrics, which had been Zuri's primary input when Min Jae had finally asked for it in December. She had given him 3 pages of notes on selection philosophy and criteria design. She had done this from her apartment in Crown Heights on a Tuesday afternoon when it was snowing outside and her shoulder was at roughly 70%, and she was wearing a sweater he had never seen before. He knew about the sweater because they had started doing the Thursday calls by video in December, which had been her suggestion, stated plainly, "I find phone calls slightly more work than they need to be. I'd rather see your face." He had agreed to this immediately and then spent 3 minutes in his office understanding what that meant, which was that Zuri Coleman had requested to see his face on Thursdays, which was the kind of information that required processing. He processed it by showing up to the Thursday calls. She came back to the building in February, not to her old role. That had been understood between them through a series of conversations that built on each other slowly, over the Thursday calls, without being a formal negotiation and without being entirely informal either. She came back as something that didn't have a clean title, which both of them acknowledged, and which the organizational chart would eventually resolve. What it meant in practice, she had an office. Not the corner room on the 14th floor. A different office, on the same floor as Min Jae's own, with a window that faced south and a corkboard beside the desk where she put the photograph from Prospect Park. She was not 3 steps behind anyone. She walked into the building on a Wednesday morning in February, which was sunny in the specific brittle way of New York in winter, and she took the elevator to the executive floor and walked to her office and sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. Her shoulder was at 90%. The rehab was technically complete and practically ongoing, which she had explained to Min Jae as the difference between finishing a process and finishing the consequences of it. At 9 a.m., Min Jae knocked on her open door. She looked up. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, and he set one on her desk and did not say anything about it being there, and did not wait for thanks. "The Torres follow-up assessment," he said, sitting in the chair across from her. "She wants to do a 90-day review of the structural changes Park implemented. I'd like your input on the review parameters before I confirm the engagement." Zuri looked at the coffee cup. At him. "Send me the engagement letter. I'll have notes by end of day." "Good." He stayed in the chair for a moment. "The foundation. The spring scholarship ceremony is in April." "I know. I'd like you to be present." She looked at him. "It's my foundation." "I know. I meant I'd like you to speak. At the ceremony." He paused. They should know whose idea it was. She looked out the south-facing window. The city below moved through its February morning, indifferent as always, everybody going somewhere. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's fine." He stood. He was almost to the door when she spoke. "Min Jae?" He stopped. "The ginger tea," she said. "Did you actually stock my kitchen, Or did you tell Cho to do it? He turned back. She was looking at him with the evaluating look, but there was something underneath the evaluation that was warmer than the evaluation. I told Cho to do it, he said, but I specified the brand myself. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her laptop. Close my door on your way out, she said. I have notes to write. He pulled the door closed behind him. In the hallway outside her office, he stood for a moment. The building moved around him. Voices, phones, the elevator arriving and departing. And he let it move. He did not have somewhere urgent to be for the first time in a very long time. Or rather, he had the same urgent somewhere to be that he always had, but he had stopped letting the urgency eat everything outside it. He went to his office and opened the Torres engagement letter and read it, and at the bottom he wrote a note. Zuri Coleman, to review parameters. Incorporate her input before confirming. He sent it to Cho with that note attached. Then he opened his calendar and looked at Thursday. He had blocked it 3 months ago. He blocked it every week now. The block was labeled simply with a letter, Z. His assistant had noticed and had not commented, which Min-jae appreciated. Some things in an organization communicate themselves without explanation. The Coleman Foundation Spring Scholarship Ceremony was held on a Saturday in April at a rented event space in Midtown. 40 people. The 6 scholarship recipients and their families. Members of the selection committee. Several organizational staff members who had been involved in the foundation's construction. Hana Lim, who sat in the second row and cried twice without appearing to notice she was doing it. Min-jae sat in the back. He sat there deliberately. Not because he was hiding, he had been introduced at the start, his role in funding the foundation acknowledged. He sat there because it was not his event. It was hers. And the correct place for him in something that was hers was not at the front. Zuri spoke for 12 minutes. She spoke about what it meant to have your work seen. Not celebrated, just seen. The particular sustenance of existing in a context where your contributions were visible to the people around you. She talked about the 6 students in the room not as recipients of charity, but as people who had built something real with their own effort and were being given the conditions to continue building. She talked about what it cost a person to keep going in the absence of those conditions, and what it meant when those conditions finally arrived. She did not talk about herself. She did not reference the gala or the shooting or what had brought the foundation into existence. She had told Min-jae when he had asked about her speech, the students should be the subject, not the origin story. He had understood. He watched her at the front of the room, in a deep green dress he had not seen before. Her shoulder carrying the last visible remnant of the injury, in the way she held her left arm slightly closer to her body than her right, her voice clear and unhurried. And he thought about the photograph on the corkboard, the one from Prospect Park, the woman laughing with her whole face. He thought that he was going to see that face again, not at a podium, on a Thursday, on a regular Tuesday morning when there was nothing urgent, in the slow accumulation of ordinary time. He was going to do the work to deserve that. After the ceremony, in the lobby, the 6 students and their families moved through the space, and Zuri moved with them, talking to each one. Not formally. The way she talked to everyone, direct, present, asking specific questions, and listening to the specific answers. Min-jae stayed by the wall. He watched the room. Hana appeared beside him. She was holding a glass of water, and she looked at Zuri across the room, and then at Min-jae. She's good at this, Hana said. She's good at everything, Min-jae said. Hana looked at him. The assessment she'd run on him in the hospital room in October, he could feel it running again, updated against 3 months of evidence. She told me about the Thursday calls, she said. He said nothing. She said you ask questions, Hana said. She said you listen to the answers. I'm learning to, he said. Hana was quiet for a moment. She hasn't told you this, she said. And I'm telling you without her permission, which she will probably give me a hard time about. But, she paused, she laughs on Thursdays, after the calls. A pause. She didn't used to laugh much, working for you. She cared about the work and she was good at it and she was present, but not light. Not the way she is now. Hana looked at her water glass. I just thought you should know that. Min-jae looked across the room at Zuri, who was crouching slightly to talk to a young woman in the scholarship cohort who looked nervous and was becoming less nervous as the conversation continued. "Thank you," he said. Hana nodded. She moved away. Across the room, Zuri finished her conversation with the young woman and straightened, and her eyes found Min-jae against the wall and held there for a moment. A room of 40 people between them, and she found him the way she had always found him, directly, without searching, with the particular accuracy of someone who has been tracking a specific presence for a very long time. He crossed the room. He was not hurrying, he was not performing anything for the room around them. He moved through the people and the conversations and arrived in front of her, and she looked up at him, and the evaluating look was present, but underneath it was the other thing, the warmer thing, the one he'd started seeing in December and was still learning to read. "The young woman you were talking to," he said. "Chen Wei," she said, "computer science. She's building a routing optimization tool for public transit systems. It's genuinely impressive." A pause. She was worried her project wasn't significant enough for the foundation criteria. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that significant is a word people use to make themselves feel better about ignoring things that are actually useful." She looked at him. "She'll be fine." "Yes," he said. They stood in the middle of the room together, not 3 steps apart, side by side. "Your speech," he said. "What about it?" "It was—" He stopped, because the first word that came was the right word, and he was still slightly unaccustomed to using the right word without editing it first. "It was exactly right," he said. She looked at him with the evaluating look and the warm thing under it. "You're getting better at that," she said. "At what?" "Saying what you mean without the architecture around it." He thought about this. "Still working on it." "I know," she said. "So am I." The room moved around them, the scholarship recipients and their families, the afternoon light through the event space windows, the particular quality of an ordinary Saturday in April, unremarkable and specific and here. "April 14th, he said. She looked at him. "That's tomorrow." "I know." She studied his face, the evaluating look doing its work. "What did you do?" she said. "There's a reservation," he said. "If you want it. Small place, no scene, good food, tomorrow evening." He paused. "Not a business dinner, not a meeting, not a Thursday." He looked at her directly. "Just dinner." The warm thing under the evaluating look settled into something definite. "What time?" she said. 7, he said. "I'll pick you up at 6:30. She nodded. She looked at the room around them, the foundation, the students, the afternoon, the thing they had both built their way through to arrive here. "Min-jae," she said. "Yes." "You're still learning," she said. "And so am I. Whatever this is—" She stopped. "I don't want it to be a story about what you became after I got shot. I want it to be a story about what we build after that, starting from here." She looked at him. "That's a different thing." "I know," he said. "We'll be bad at it sometimes." "Yes, and there'll be Tuesdays when it's hard and nothing is urgent, and that's when we'll find out what it actually is." "You said that in the hospital," he said. "The Tuesday test." "I meant it then," she said. "I mean it now." He looked at her, at the face that laughed with its whole self in a photograph pinned to a corkboard, at the shoulder that had healed and still remembered, at the eyes that evaluated everything and had, slowly and without being asked, and without any guarantee of return, begun to evaluate him differently. "Then we start from here," he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the room, to the students and the families and the foundation that bore her name, and she moved back into it, and Min-jae stood where she had left him and watched, and the afternoon light came through the windows the way April light does when it means business, warm and specific, and entirely without sentiment. He had run an empire for 15 years and controlled territory and managed power and understood leverage the way other men understood language, fluently, instinctively, without having to think about it. He had spent 6 years not seeing the person 3 steps behind him. He was not going to spend the next 6 making the same mistake. He was going to spend them doing the work. Starting tomorrow at 7. Starting now.